Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's presentation. I'm Jim Van Epps, Chair of the Savannah Council, the Program Committee for the Savannah Council on World Affairs, and host for this evening's presentation by the Honorable Patrick Faber, entitled Belize, Impacts of COVID-19 on Education, Healthcare, and the Economy. I'm hoping to learn a lot this evening, and especially not only the situation that Mr. Faber will present, but also about a little bit more about our nearby Central American neighbor. First, I'd like to begin by thanking our sponsors of this evening's presentation. As you see on the screen, Kreitz Auto Group is a platinum sponsor of the Savannah Council for 2020 to 2021. Kreitz is your exclusive local dealer for Buick, GMC, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Sprinter vans. Kreitz is a continuing sponsor again this year, and we very much appreciate their support of our program. Thank you, Kreitz. Next slide, please. Our sponsors this evening also include Esther Nemzikowski, KFT, an international investment company. Formed in 1996, KFT is focused on Central and Eastern European opportunities for over 20 years. So thank you, KFT. And also Cathedral Productions is our sponsor. Founded as the videography vendor for the Cathedral Basilica of St. John the Baptist here in Savannah, Cathedral Productions has expanded to provide nonprofit and commercial marketing videography, as well as live streaming and consultation services. So thank you, Cathedral Productions. Next slide, Jose, please. Our presenter this evening, the Honorable Patrick Faber, is Belize's parliamentary leader of the opposition and the new leader of the United Democratic Party. Mr. Faber started young, working as a street campaigner for the party since he was 14, and has served as youth director and member of the party's central executive. He's Belize's longest serving minister of education and is appreciated for implementing sweeping reforms in the Belize education system. He's been employed by the government of Belize since 2003 and has been vice principal of academic affairs and lecturer for the economics and religious studies, among other programs, at the Anglican Cathedral College in Belize from 1998 to 2007. He's also been president of the Belize National Youth Commission, member of the Standing Committee for the Anglican Diocese of Belize, and a member of the Anglican Diocesan Education Board. He received a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from Valdosta State, as well as a Master's in Educational Leadership from the University of Florida, and is currently working on his doctorate in Public Administration from Valdosta State. So to his topic, Belize is a tiny nation in Central America and the Caribbean, and like most other countries in the world, has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. In this talk, Mr. Faber aims to describe the plight of the small nation from the angle of the pandemic's economy and its education and healthcare systems. Over the past year, Belize has faced national and municipal elections, and so a look will be taken at the effects of these two election cycles on the fight against the pandemic. A close look will be made at the concrete measures taken by the country against the pandemic, and proposed next steps will be examined, including a look at the introduction of vaccines and wider post-COVID-19 plans. So following this production, as is customary for the Savannah Council, Mr. Faber will take questions from our viewers that can easily be sent via the Zoom Q&A function on your computer or your iPad. Just click on the Q&A icon on your screen. A box will appear in which your question can be typed, and then click on the box's send button. I suggest you send your questions as they occur to you, as the earlier we receive them, the better the chance of their being asked before our close at 8 p.m. I'm looking forward to learning much here this evening. And with that, it's my honor to present Mr. Faber. It's an honor to have you here with us this evening, even in this virtual fashion. We hope to see you again in person soon. And Mr. Faber, the screen is now yours.
Firstly, let me bring you greetings from beautiful Belize. my beautiful home in the Caribbean and in the heart of Central America. And let me immediately after doing so, give a special greeting to our folks from Georgia, which is the only other place that I have lived other than here in Belize for an extended period of time as I studied between the period of 2006 to 2008 in Valdosta, Georgia at Valdosta State University. Let me especially single out and say a special good evening to the members of your Savannah World Affairs Council and to your president, Jose da Cruz de Armatia. And I thank him for the invitation for addressing this auspicious gathering this evening. And let me also acknowledge the vice president and the chairman of the programs committee, Mr. Jim Van Epps, who was the main person I liaised on with to get everything set for this evening. It's been a year or so now since Belize started experiencing the effects of the pandemic. Actually, our first case uh, was found on March 23rd, so it's pretty much a year. And just by way of introduction, you've heard uh, Mr. Van Epps tell you basically what I'm going to talk about. It's repeated here on this slide. Has been able to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic over a 1 year period. And I want to focus this evening on looking at its effect on our education system. You've heard that I have been Belize's Minister of Education for about 13 years. And of course, I've never experienced leading in a pandemic before. So this was something new to me. And as is the case with so many others, probably very new as well. I also wanted to look at things from the perspective of the healthcare system here in Belize. And then we'll take a look at the economy. And if time permits, I will look at the political aspects of things and how that has affected the pandemic. And then I want to tell you a bit about how we're moving forward with vaccinations, etc. But for the benefit of those who don't know where Belize is, we are pretty close to the United States. Belize is neighbor to Mexico and Guatemala. And so it is uh, south of Mexico and it is to the east and the north of Guatemala. And it's a very small country. It has about a population of, the estimates for 2020 suggests that it will be around 420,000 people. It's about 176 miles long and about 68 miles wide. So it's a very, very small country. It is the only Central American country that speaks English or has English as its official language, although a good percentage of the population, a significant percentage of the population also speak Spanish and of course various different languages to make it quite a melting pot. It was a former British colony and it gained its independence on September 21st, 1981. Belize, because of its unique location, then is a member of CARICOM, the Caribbean Community, and it is also a member of the Latin America and Caribbean states and the Central America Integration System, SICA. And it is the only country to hold full membership in all three of these regional organizations. By the way, the picture on the side are my three beautiful kids. So Belize is a melting pot, and you see different kinds of people in Belize, different colors, different ethnicities, but we unify as one people. The political system, Belize has a parliamentary constitutional democracy and is directed by an elected prime minister, and that prime minister is the person who controls the majority of the elected House of Representatives. It is modeled off the British parliamentary system and is a part of the British Commonwealth. And our laws are patterned off the common law in England. Queen Elizabeth II is our head of state. She's still on our money, although it is very titular and Belize, by and large, is autonomous and makes its own decisions here locally. As I've said before, we have a bicameral legislature made up of two houses, the National Assembly it is called, and those two houses are the House of Representatives, which is an elected body, and the Senate, which is an appointed body. So I am a member of the House of Representatives, and I've been a member of the House of Representatives since I was elected in February of 2003. So that gives me 18 long years of service as a member of the House of Representatives. In Belize, there are two main political parties, the United Democratic Party, which is the party that I lead now, and the People's United Party. The United Democratic Party was in government for 13 years and lost power to the People's United Party in an election held in November of last year while the pandemic was happening. Our education system, just by way of background, it follows the British model, and we have 5 sectors: preschool, primary school, secondary school, tertiary level school. Tertiary level is made up of what we call junior colleges or sixth forms, again, patterned off the British. They're 2-year colleges basically, and we do have 2 universities, only 2 universities in the entire country. That is the National University of Belize and a small private university called Galen University. A 5th element of our education system is the adult and continuing education system of the country, where people who are adult learners who didn't get a chance to complete their education get an opportunity to go back to school. Belize also contributes to the University of the West Indies, which operates a small external campus here in our country. The healthcare system, Belize has a relatively well-established medical care delivery system. We have both private and public hospitals or clinics. Government operates hospitals or polyclinics in every major city and town and other major population centers and villages. Belize City, of course, is the commercial hub of the country, and so you'll find most of these medical entities, the services here, dental and private medical lab diagnostic facilities here in the urban center of Belize City. And the referral hospital, the tertiary hospital, Carl Hirschner Memorial Hospital, is the only one of its kind in the country, is here as well in Belize City. There are a couple of regional hospitals, one in the south, one in the north, and one in the west of the country. And we have a total of about 700 public hospital beds in the country altogether. Belize's economy initially revolved around logging, trees, and wood, mahogany, especially logwood. Logwood was used for a dye. Mahogany, of course, was used for making furniture, and chicle, which was used to make chewing gum. The Wrigley Company used to import much of the chicle that Belize produced or British Honduras produced in the early years. And for those who don't know, Belize was formerly known as British Honduras. Tourism is our main economic driver, and it's responsible for 1 in 7 jobs in this country. But we have other industries, bananas, citrus, lobster and fish, and sugar and citrus. I want to get in. I use that as a kind of background so that people can be more familiar with the elements that we will be looking at: our education system, our economy, and our healthcare system. But I want to share with you now a timeline of how things happened over the period of a year, basically. Our first case was documented, first case of COVID-19 was documented in on March 23rd, 2020. And it was a Belizean woman who had returned to San Pedro from Los Angeles in the United States. That weekend previous, schools were being closed for the Easter break, which is normally 2 weeks. And so that started what we thought was a temporary closing of our schools that ended up lasting much longer than just those 2 weeks. Our second case was diagnosed on March 25th, a third case on March 29th. And back in this time, the cases were few and far in between. As you can see, very few cases. By April 13th, there were 18 confirmed cases and there were 2 deaths. A death on the 4th and the 10th of April. And it wasn't until June 5th that we saw a next new reported case. So what that meant was that there was a time when, for a number of days, well over 2 months, that we didn't have a new case of COVID-19 in the country. By July 14th, there were 39 cases due to clusters in Blue Creek and San Felipe villages, and those villages were locked down for a month. Now, you'll understand that Belize is on the border with Mexico, very much like the United States. And because of economic opportunities and the shopping opportunities, many Belizeans cross the rivers going over to the Mexican side to purchase cheap commodities and bring them back. We call those persons border jumpers, and they actually contributed to the spread of COVID-19 very heavily in these communities. By July 21st, we had 48 cases, 2 deaths, but we had no community spread, so we could basically trace where these cases were coming from. In August 2020, we had a phased reopening of the airport where we allowed Belizeans who were abroad to be repatriated, and that saw an increase of the number of confirmed cases. So that took it up to about 821 by the end of August deaths. Usually in September, we have our Independence Day celebration, and there's a lot of partying, but as a result of facing the pandemic, those celebrations were very subdued. And as a result, we were able to steadily manage the number of cases that could quite possibly have gotten out of hand had we not done so. Despite these measures, confirmed cases continued to increase, reaching 1,943 cases by the end of September, and 26 documented deaths by that time. October 1st saw the reopening of the airport, international travel, and a subsequent 3rd wave of cases. October 31st was recorded as the single day with the highest number of confirmed cases, and post-election, November 11th saw a subsequent spike. Now, I said that if I had time, I would speak about the effect of the general election on the spread of COVID-19. There was a tremendous amount of recklessness on the part of particularly the party that won the election, and you may pardon my bias as the leader of the other party, but the now Prime Minister who led the party then was very, very reckless in allowing for people to come out despite the fact that they might have been COVID-19 positive, while the government was saying to people, don't come out in large numbers, don't gather at these public rallies for election purposes. The opposition party at the time encouraged this kind of thing. They encouraged motorcades and gatherings of celebration on nomination day and on election day. They encouraged people who were even positive to come out and vote. And so right after the elections, we saw a serious spike in the number of cases. The data became very difficult to track because the change in the government resulted in a kind of change in reporting style. Whereas before a recovery would have meant you needed a negative test after being tested positive and time had passed, there was a change in the way that was determined, or you're curing a person was determined, a cured person was determined. They only allowed, I think, 14 days to pass, and that person was no longer deemed positive or not even retested. December 12, 2020 also saw a re-implementation of a curfew. We have had several of these curfews over time, and the curfew is still in place today, so that by 10 p.m. every night, we are off the streets and in our homes. To date, there is a record of 12,410 confirmed cases in Belize, 317 deaths, 12,047 of those cases recovered. So a very small number of persons deemed to be positive at this time. and we began our vaccination process on March 1st, 2021, not too long ago, a few weeks ago. I wanted to talk a bit on the effects on the education system. Right away, back in March of last year, we established an oversight committee, and a decision was taken by the government to close all schools on March 20th, as I said. A total of 102,208 students were out of school as a result of this at various levels, the levels I mentioned earlier: preschool, primary school, secondary, junior colleges. Everything was closed down. And there were an additional 5,000 students who were at the National University. And to date, students are still out of school. So this is a very hard hit sector. The government announced, I think it was yesterday, that starting April 12th, after the Easter vacation, there will be an attempt to restart face-to-face education in our schools. Um, about a third of our country's population are school age, so this is a major issue for us. Internet and cell phone coverage is very limited in rural areas and remote areas, and so while we tried to do some distance learning using technology, it became very difficult to do. It is important to note that 80% of our schools are owned by churches. We have a church-state system of education, very different from what the United States is used to. And most of those churches have a diminished capacity to provide additional resources. So we weren't able to do all that was needed to be done in order to fix these issues. The Ministry of Education at that time learned to be very creative. We put out radio lessons so that children at home could listen and learn while they were home. We put on TV lessons. We put out printed resources. The newspaper companies helped us to uh, print materials so that we could have children take it home from pre-K to 12. And there were online resources on the ministry's website as well. And we continued professional development for teachers. We allowed them to train in areas of financial literacy. We then used the time to train them to use the digital devices so that they can be able to, once they get back in the classroom or once they um, get devices, and there was a push by the government to get such devices. Once that was the case, then we would then be able to have our teachers equipped to deal with that. And of course, there was psychosocial support for our teachers who were having very difficult times. So we tried our very best to get digital devices to our students. There were about 12,000 students in need, and the government secured electronic devices for high school students, all 12,000 of them. And we were able to as well start the process of getting our elementary school, primary school students with some devices as well. We continued with our learning continuity programs, and we tried to issue food packages to students who, once they were in school, would have relied on uh, the feeding programs in our schools. Effects on the healthcare system, as you heard me describe, there are 4 hospitals, basically 3 regional and the KHMH. And these hospitals basically created COVID isolation units and dealt with lesser severe COVID cases. Once the cases were determined to be very severe, they were referred to the KHMH, where ventilation services were provided. COVID units at the KHMH were divided for those persons requiring ventilation and persons under investigation, and also general wards for more stable patients. Each area were manned by nurses, 3 nurses, 2 doctors. A total of 25 patients could be ventilated at any given time. Now, in the context of what you have in the US, of course, this is a small number, but remember, Belize is a very small country. At the height of the COVID pandemic, the COVID unit, patients under investigation, and the were overflowing. We were filled to capacity in the hospital. A specialist clinic had to be turned into a casualty department, and previous emergency department had to be converted to COVID and patients under investigation areas. Specialist clinics were relocated outside of the hospital and scaled down. and services were only provided in extenuating circumstances. Elective surgeries were suspended and only emergency surgeries were performed. Um, Early this year, there were many pitfalls and staff infections and exposures in the hospitals. So protocols had to be put in place. That slowed down the fight a bit, but it highlighted that resources and manpower were needed, and so these were pulled from specialist areas uh, in order to cover COVID areas, resulting in, as we said, suspension of some services. Staff became exposed. Um, or ill, and remaining individuals were expected to work longer and more frequent shifts. The government did try to do its best to compensate the frontline workers by giving them incentive payments. However, it could not be a continuous thing. It was like a one-off payment that many received. The effects on the economy: the pandemic led to a large contraction in the economy of Belize, the largest in recent decades, 18.2% contraction in 2020. And of course, this was because of the tremendous declines in our major industry, which is tourism. We saw a 71% contraction in tourism. And of course, even in the manufacturing and distribution industries as well, we saw a decline as well in agriculture. And when it all combined, it made a serious hit on our economy. Of course, many people were not able to work. So as a result of that job loss in tourism and commerce and distribution, unemployment skyrocketed. The further fall in the productive sector went down to about 21%, owing to decreases in production of sugar, citrus, and flour. And of course, because of um, the rising costs in the cost of food, health, and housing, inflation also went up. The fiscal deficit expanded from 3.4% in the first quarter in 2019 to 11% for the same period in 2020. And of course, it was because of the decline in revenues, partially due to the tax relief that government was giving to businesses so that they could cope with COVID-19. And our balance of payment current account deficit widened from 1.4% of GDP in the first half of 2019 to 2% GDP in the same period 2020, mainly because of the declines in the tourist sector and because of the shutdown. The government earmarked 25 million Belize dollars, 12.5 US million dollars for pandemic relief to households and to support businesses. Um, Not quite the trillions of dollars that the US has put in place for its citizens, but a small amount of money that aided in helping our persons who were suffering from unemployment, and of course, small businesses and medium enterprise, micro and small medium enterprises that were struggling. All of this, of course, contributed to spending and revenue loss that caused public sector debt to expand rapidly to a very unsustainable 132% of GDP by the end of the third quarter in 2020. The good news is that things are expected to get back on track, and in this year of 2021, we are expecting a projected growth of 7.5%. We expect that this will come as a result of bouncing back of tourism, of course, and also the bouncing back of agriculture, and by higher value added in crops and livestock. That should help us tremendously. Manufacturing is also forecasted to grow. This is supported by a recovery in the output in food, beverage, electricity, and the water subsectors. I wanted to not take up the entire time because I did want to focus more on what people may have had as their concerns or questions that they wanted to put forward. But this slide shows the effort that we're making in getting the vaccination for our citizens. Actually, that is me there in that picture receiving my jab, as they call it. On Friday last, I received the first dose of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is the vaccine that they're using here in Belize, primarily because um, that vaccine is being gifted to us. I think 25,000 or so came from the government and people of India, and another 1,000 of those vaccinations came by way of the government and people of Barbados that got them as a contribution from the government of India. So indirectly, they also came from India. To date, Belize has administered at least 18,182 doses of the vaccine. And of course, this vaccine requires 2 doses. So we expect that these jabs will be enough to vaccinate about 2.3% of the country's population. Tier 1 of the vaccination exercise saw our frontline workers being vaccinated, or nurses and doctors and people who work in the healthcare system. And tier 2 has just started. That includes teachers. We have about 6,000 teachers in our school system, and so they are currently being vaccinated, and we will work our way by way of importance to getting things back in motion for the rest of the population. If we continue on this path, we expect that a total of about 1,000 vaccines would be administered each day, and that after 70% of the population vaccinated. So those are our efforts, and we're working desperately every day to try to beat COVID. As I've said, we are looking to reopen schools in April, and there are many other measures that the government is taking in order to fix our issues. I should share one of them with you that is very, very pressing right now. The government has proposed a 10% salary cut to the public servants, which are a huge percent of the labor force here in Belize, and our teachers, and also an increment freeze for the next 3 years. Needless to say, the unions, the teachers union and the public service union are not happy about this proposed cut. The budget is scheduled to be read in another few days' time, and the Prime Minister is facing major opposition from these unions because they say that while they understand that tough measures are needed, that the government really should not start with cutting the salaries of public servants. And there are many, many um, experiences that are happening where the government is believed to be behaving recklessly in terms of spending, in terms of hiring new hires as a new party in government that really shows wastage that could be tackled before cutting the salaries of public servants. So that is a major issue that is now on the table here in Belize and facing the government. My friends, there is probably so much more that I could say. The time will simply not permit me to get into all that I would want to share with you on these issues, and of course others having to do with my beautiful Belize. But I will be happy to take your questions. I see that we have at least 2 of them already posted, so I will go to those now.
Let me start first, and thank you so much for just a terrific presentation, not only on the challenges to healthcare, the economy, and education, but your background on the country in particular has been really useful. And I've got to applaud you and thank you for those beautiful pictures you have of your fellow country men and women, actually little boys and girls, at the beginning of your presentation. So if you'd like to take those, there are 3 questions right now. You want to take them yourself?
Yes, sure. The first question comes from Olave Arens, and Olave asks, what is the population structure in Belize? How large is the above 60 age group? The truth is that Belize has a very young population, and you will find that the majority, I'd say about 70% of our population is under 35 years of age and under. So the older population is definitely in the minority of our population. As I said, about a third of our population is actually school aged. And for us, that is between 5 and 14. So that in itself tells you that we have a very, very young population here in Belize. It is one of the reasons why, for instance, we have lowered the retirement rate in the public service, for instance, from 65 to 55, because we need to create opportunities for our younger people. And that really is the struggle of our nation, to try to ensure that our young people are gainfully occupied and are positively contributing to our economy. The next question comes from Charles O'Brien. And he asked, has China been active with economic or military initiatives in Belize? Belize has diplomatic ties with Taiwan and has had those diplomatic ties for over 30 years now. And so, as you may know, Belize, any country that has diplomatic relations with one or the other country cannot have diplomatic relations with the other. So while we have a major amount of Chinese persons living in Belize, there are shopkeepers and or store owners for clothing and that kind of thing. And we have diplomatic ties with Taiwan. And Taiwan has assisted Belize in terms of its economic activity constantly, consistently over its 30 years of friendship. For example, Taiwan offers full scholarships to Belizeans. It is the largest provider of scholarships for our Belizean people. In any given year, I think now we send about 45 or so Belizeans on full scholarships to Taiwan, which is, of course, all the way on the other side of the world. And then Daniel Malachuk. I apologize about the pronunciations if I'm mispronouncing them. Daniel asks, what is Belize's policy about immigration from Central America and Mexico? We don't have a major issue with immigration from Mexico, but we do have immigration issues with other Central American countries. Some may say that I am biased, but the facts will bear me out, that Belize is the most peaceful country in all of Central America. We've never had a civil war. And as a result of that, many who are coming from other countries are living in other countries where they face persecution by gang warfare and or by for political reasons, have made Belize their home. And you will note that over the years, Belize has become more Hispanic. I said earlier that we speak English as our official language, but that many people speak Spanish as well. And that's because of the huge influx of Central Americans into Belize. They come from all over. And just a bit of history, of course, you may know that Guatemala has a claim on Belize. And so by right, constitutionally, Guatemalans can't become Belizeans, but that does not stop them from coming into Belize and making Belize their home. Much of our immigrants from Central America come from El Salvador and Honduras as well. I had the occasion of being at the swearing in for President Bukele of El Salvador a few years ago, maybe 1 or 2 years ago. And I was telling the new president that a significant portion of our population around the capital city of Belmopan came from El Salvador. So we, of course, are a very small country. Our population is small. We could do with about 1 million or so more people, to be honest. And so we have very lax policies in terms of accepting our Central American brothers and sisters, but there are those, of course, who raise concerns about them. Many pass through Belize, going on to Guatemala or Mexico en route to the United States, but so we don't really have a problem that we can't handle. Uh, Olavi Arens asks another question. What are the main tourist attractions? What would attract someone like me, a college professor, to visit? I get a chance to boast now about beautiful Belize. Well, Belize is in the Caribbean and it's also in Central America, as you know, and we are washed on the eastern side, the entire eastern coast of Belize, by the beautiful Caribbean Sea. One of my pictures showed the Blue Hole, which is a sinkhole, an atoll that boasts the best diving in the world. And of course, Belize has the second largest barrier reef in the world, next only to the Great Australian Barrier Reef. The only thing we boast about is that our reef is very much alive and well. And so while you see dead corals on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, you can see a very healthy reef system here in Belize along the full length of Belize. But if you're not into the sand and the sea and the diving and the snorkeling, which should already be a great attraction, and of course, the warm weather when it's freezing there in the United States, you can come because Belize offers the flora and the fauna. My very first slide on the presentation showed the Mayan temple. And these are scattered all over Central America, Guatemala, Mexico, Belize. But we are able to offer inland attractions as well. We have bird watching, nature trails, we have mountainous areas, we have caves for hiking. So you can do all of this in a couple of days. I've known people who have come for the weekend and have done a bit of the inland stuff and then also go to our keys. We have quite a few islands off the shores of Belize that are just breathtaking. So I encourage all of you to come to beautiful Belize. From Atlanta, it's only a 3-hour flight. You might be closer to Jacksonville or to Miami. You can get to Belize from Miami on a 1 hour, 45-minute flight. So it's that close. And the tickets are very reasonable. Staying in Belize is very reasonable. And hey, you have a friend here in me. So just let me know that you're coming and I'll make sure that you have a wonderful stay. You'll find that while we have many different people, and that is really what our best attraction is, the melting pot of people who live together in harmony by and large, and who will make sure that you feel very welcome in this country. Like in any other place, in our major city, Belize City, we have issues of crime and violence. And so we quite often advise people to stay away from Belize City if you don't have to be there. But Belize City also has quite a few wonderful attractions. And we urge people to come and to have fun. Belize awaits you. I don't know how we're doing on time. Is that the last one or we have?
No, no, you got another one that Patrick, it says, the text says, this sounds like someone who knows you from Ivan or Ivan Nikolov. Patrick, you will have time. I think the audience would benefit learning about Quebec is the question.
Okay, Ivan Nikolov is a very, very, very good friend of mine. He is the head of the foreign student program or the foreign studies program at Valdosta State University and is a very, very good friend of Belize. I'm very pleased to see Ivan in this meeting. Quebec is a consortium that was made up in excess of 30 years ago that brings together American universities and or tertiary level institutions in Belize. And we work together to advance higher education in Belize. Valdosta State University is a member of Quebec, and we have several other schools in Georgia, in Florida, in Kentucky, 40 U.S. Universities that are part of this consortium, and they meet twice a year, once in the winter in Belize, so they get to run away from the cold, and in the summer, when it's warm, Belizeans go to the various different campuses that are hosting, so that we can do some shopping, and at the same time work on advancing education here in Belize. It's a reciprocal relationship that Quebec shares with Belize. I'm sorry, that the universities in the U.S. share with Belize in terms of or partnership in Quebec. Or students go to the US sometimes to study. In fact, I am a very proud recipient of Quebec's efforts. When I studied at Valdosta State, what seems like a forever now, I studied at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville as well, which is another Quebec school. And those schools as well send their students to Belize, where they are able to capitalize on a number of things, including working with our wonderful multicultural classrooms where children are coming from various different homes. Some are Chinese, some are Mennonite, some are Garifuna, which is a mixture of Carib and African. We have our local Creole people who are a mixture of the European and the African slaves. We have the mestizos. So it's a real melting pot, and your student teachers in programs come and work with our kids sometimes from universities there that are part of Quebec. We have, of course, the anthropology studies and architectural studies with the Mayan temples and the artifacts that we have. In fact, most of the temples here in Belize are still very much unexcavated, and so there is the potential for collaboration with universities and institutions abroad, and Quebec really pulls this together. Thank you for asking me that question, Ivan. I think that is very useful to share with our friends.
Sure is. There's one more question that's come in, and that's from George Shaw. And George's question is, Belize has diplomatic relations with Taiwan, as you mentioned. Does it have diplomatic relations with Cuba and with Venezuela?
Yes, it does. Belize does have diplomatic relations with both Cuba and Venezuela. And in fact, Belize shares a very cordial relationship with Cuba, especially. The Cuban people have been very generous to Belize, and in fact, Fidel Castro, in the time of our struggle with Guatemala um, for them to relinquish their claim, and for Belize to get its independence from Great Britain, was a true friend. And so while we don't get into the quarrel between the U.S. and Venezuela and the quarrel with the U.S. and Cuba very much, we have a lot of respect for the Cuban people. And whereas in Venezuela, the principles and policies that they follow coincide with our very democratic principles, which we practice here in Belize. We support them. Belize has benefited tremendously from an initiative some years ago called PetroCaribe, where much of its infrastructural development over that decade came from support from that initiative from Venezuela. But we reserve the right always to condemn undemocratic practices where we see them, and Belize does not hesitate to do so. But both of these countries, yes, we have diplomatic ties with them.
Okay, so a couple more questions. You mentioned that you had gotten vaccines from Barbados and one other country. Did you receive medical assistance in terms of PPE, personal protection equipment, and any medical personnel that came in and assisted in Belize?
Yes, there was a coming from Cuba, which makes the point, helps me to make the point that I was making earlier. So there was a brigade coming from Cuba to help in the initial phases of our fight against COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Cuba does not have access to all the materials that they would want to be able to help because of the blockade. And so they were not able to help us with things like PPE gear and so on. But yes, we do get donations from friendly nations, one of them being, the main one being Taiwan. As I said, from the government and people of India. And so there are several entities and of course, international agencies that help Belize in its struggle. We've seen monies in the form of loans and grants come from international financial institutions. The CDB, the IDB have all helped us in this fight. And of course, some of that money comes from the local coffers of Belize. I wish I had more time to speak about the economy and all that is going on in terms of the crunch that has now been created on our financial position as a result. I told you earlier that our debt to GDP ratio is all the way up to about 132%, which is very unsustainable. I recently had an interview with the IMF, actually, who came to do its Article 4 study here in Belize. And of course, uh, this is a small country that was already very much struggling, facing now these very tough measures, a country that can't print money the way we see it. Um, and of course, struggles on a daily basis just to keep up in normal circumstances, much less now when we're faced with a pandemic. Of course, that we had no part in creating or no part in bringing about whatsoever. So I suppose this is no different from what happens in other parts of the world that where we have developing countries struggling with this pandemic, but that is Belize's plight mainly.
We do have a couple more minutes if you wanted to say something more about the economy. I really have two very short questions at the end that I'd like to ask, but since you're kind of on a roll of the economy, do you have more you'd like to share with us?
But there was one other question that I saw here. It comes from Charles O'Brien, and he asks, as head of the opposition United Democratic Party, what specific steps do you and your party need to take to become Belize's majority leader and win the next election? Well, thanks for that question. In Belize, the political cycle, I suspect it's the same everywhere else in the world. We have ups and we have downs. The UDP was up for a very long time. It was unprecedented. We won 3 consecutive 5-year terms. And so for the better part of 13 years, we were the government and we were winning local elections. I think there was a bit of fatigue, and I will be honest with you, some elements of corruption within my own party that caused Belizeans to want a change. And so in November of 2020, they made that change overwhelmingly. We have 31 seats in the parliament, in the House, and the UDP was only able to win 5. I am one of those seat holders. And but even before winning my seat, which I've maintained now for going on 18 years, as I've mentioned, which makes me one of the longest serving members, although I'm one of the youngest members still in the House. It's not something that could be done easily, but I'm able now to lead the party. So currently, our party is starting from scratch. It's an entirely tedious, time-consuming, but very, very important task of rebuilding the party. Of course, there are many who were a part of the success of the party who, once we lost the elections, abandoned us. And, so we're really trying to decide who is really for this party and who wants to see betterment. But I've seen this happen before. We lost like that once before in 1998. It took us 10 years to regain the government. Once we did that, the PUPs lost in very much the same manner, and it took them 13 years to regain the government. I am hoping, though, that we can regain the government within the next general election cycle, which comes in 5 years' time, or before we have a parliamentary system where the Prime Minister may decide with just 30 days' notice to call the general elections. And the way things have been going for my friend, the Prime Minister, it may well be that he won't make it all the way to those 5 years. So we are making sure that we are doing what we need to do to be ready.
Understand. One question back on vaccines, if I could, and that is how do you determine who gets vaccines? I didn't catch that in your presentation, or did I just miss it? But by age group and children and teachers, what are the priorities?
Well, they started with various different, by assigning different tiers. The first tier was for our frontline workers. So those who work in the healthcare system, they were first given the vaccinations. So doctors, nurses, those who work in the COVID units across the country. And then we started giving to elderly people who were vulnerable. So those who had pre-existing conditions that made them vulnerable to COVID-19. And once that was completed, we started working on a second tier, which included the media, and teachers. And eventually we'll work our way down. I think they determine it as they go along. I don't mean to be such a harsh critic, but many will tell you that the government plans as it goes along and doesn't have a steady plan. They might accuse me of being biased as the leader of the opposition here.
No, no, no. So one last question.
Sure.
The airport is open. It's been open. Is tourism recovering now?
Not quite yet. In fact, because of the airport is open and we welcome tourists, but many of our hotels, because of the numbers that have been coming in, they don't see it as sustainable to keep the doors open. So they're trying to work on making sure that we can minimize the number of cases. And according to what statistics the government puts out now, we are managing quite well, but we're not oblivious to the fact that there are severe third waves coming in all over the rest of the world. And we, of course, anticipate that there might well be other waves of this very deadly pandemic, other strains of the virus that will hit Belize. And so we want to make sure that we are ready for this kind of thing. Of course, because of the strain it puts on our healthcare system, even the US government advises citizens not to come because you'd probably be better off in the US getting a ventilator if you got sick to that extent than you would here in Belize. So there are these kinds of warnings that the US government puts out, and countries that travel, their citizens travel to Belize, and that kind of hampers our full development. So we want to make sure we get a good handle on things before fully embracing our visitors again. But we feel that this time is coming. There is now a light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccinations. And we believe that if the US continues on the path that it is on to get those vaccinations or a significant portion of the population vaccinated, then that will help us as well to get things back on track here for the tourism industry.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So let me say this past hour has been really terrific. And I'd like to thank you, Mr. Faber, on behalf of the Savannah Council on World Affairs for an excellent presentation and thoughtful and candid answers to our questions. We really appreciate it. We're grateful to you for your contribution to our program, especially regarding how a neighbor country is managing the way through the pandemic. And we wish you and your countrymen and women great success in your efforts. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here. And I look forward to sharing when you post it on YouTube, we'll put it on the airwaves here so that our people can also hear the wonderful questions that you pose to me, the grill that you put me on.
Not at all, not at all. We never touched you, as they say. To conclude this presentation, I'd like to highlight our presentation, our next presentation on April 22nd. Please join us as our topic will be the Hot Hungry Planet, presented by Lisa Palmer, the National Geographic Visiting Professor of Science Communication at George Washington University. And so with that, I wish you all a good night. We hope you've enjoyed, as I have, the Honorable Patrick Faber's presentation on Belize, the COVID-19 impacts on education, healthcare, and the economy. Thank you all, and good night.